So, what are you doing with your life?
I actually just finished working as the DIT on a feature-length film.
And what is that?
Oh, so DIT is the digital information technologist. It's basically the person who takes all of the footage that the camera shoots and backs it up, creates redundancy, and gets it off to editing.
And where did you learn to do these things, Dano?
So, by and large, I learned how to do these things at film school.
Really?
Yeah,
Film
sort
school?
of. A question that I get asked all the time
Me
on
too.
Twitter
Yes.
is, should I go to film school? Maybe.
It's kind of like saying, should I take this job? Or should I go out with this guy? It's like, it depends on...
It depends. I would say one of the big things that really should factor into whether or not you want to go to film school is you got to look at what film school actually means. So in my case, we both went to film school, but
I went to two.
But we had vastly different experiences in regard to that because there's university sort of level film school, and then there's also like technical colleges.
Like a vocational school.
Yeah, so I went to a technical college for film school, so it was a 2-year diploma program, very tech and how to get a job focused. So Selden, Alberta Institute of Technology was where I went, and they were very much focused on like, okay, getting a job in film in Alberta or Vancouver or Saskatchewan.
What was the cost for your education?
About $22,000 to $2,500 per semester. So 4 semesters, so a little under $10,000 for tuition.
USC does not offer aid for their grad students, at least in the first year. Or at least they didn't in 2009. Maybe that's changed. It was about $1,400 per credit hour. There was 6 to 10 credit hours per semester. I've completed 40 credit hours. Then there was like the fees and the insurance.
Yeah,
and
then you're gonna have like all of the other stuff. So that's just your
that
cost
was just
for the course registration.
Then there was the cost of the films itself, which of course you have to pay for. I'd finished 2.5 years of the coursework, and I had $60,000 in debt. And I had paid in another 45-ish. I was one of the lucky ones. I knew people who left with 200 plus in debt.
I mean, and on top of that, like particularly with the way that debt accumulates, that you're going to be paying off interest before you're even touching the principal.
Yes, I left with 60,000. I have paid into it about 19,000. I now have 69,000. Yeah. My undergrad was at NYU, and I don't know if I would call that a film school because it was film studies, which is, the way I described it back then was it's like an English degree, only instead of studying books, you study movies. It's much more about like film history, criticism, academia, theory. I decided to go into production, which is completely different. Like, the only time when I was an undergrad, the production people and the studies people's paths crossed was in like this intro course, and the production people were like, why do we need to know interpretive stuff? This is stupid. Let's just go out and run around with a camera, and it's just sort of like,
So the things I could tell them about, the problems
very other sides of the tracks.
Tech people don't understand the interpretive and just create stuff, and they're like, why did people get that meaning from it?
So I also feel like for that reason there's like a massive disparity between grad and undergrad, and we can talk about that. But I decided very snootily, I was like, well, I'm not going to go to film school if I can't go to the very best one. There's 3 very best ones. NYU, AFI, and USC. UCLA would say they're in there. They're not. I applied to 2. I got into 1, and that was USC. I went to AFI and UCLA. I didn't bother applying to those. It was also very focused on industry stuff and getting a job, but I think the only way to describe it is like a conservatory. It was like a 3-year boot camp, and there is nothing else. Like, there are no, like, other classes that you take except for, like, the business classes. It's completely intensive and also really intense. And I think the main difference between USC and other film schools is no one really had a film background, or not a very substantive one. Like, they didn't want people that did film in undergrad.
SAIT was just kind of general. I mean, a lot of actually people were coming into it kind of straight out of high school. Some people were switching careers, and of course it's a lot more local. I mean, because it is smaller, like, especially in terms of total industry output. Like, Calgary is a film city, but we're like a 5th tier film city, like, if we're honest about it. So a big consideration in whether or not to go to film school is what school are you going to, and how much is it going to cost you, and what do you intend to get out of it? Whenever
people say, should I go to film school, I feel like there is a massive, massive divide between, do you want to go to a top film school, and do you want to go to a vocational school? While, for instance, the debt is insane, I went to school with a lot of people who are already working in the industry in a way that I don't think you see in other film schools. Like, I went to school with a guy who directed Creed and is directing Black Panther. Like, I worked on his student films. The editor for Black Panther was the editor for my thesis. I also, I went to school with Mira Minon, who did Equity recently, and these are just, like, directors and big name people. Like, I knew people who work on the Mindy Project, and so it was like, the thing about USC is, if you want to work on big name things and really be like a star.
Yeah, if you want to work on big name things above the line. Because, I mean, I've got tons of friends I've worked on some big name things. I've got tons of friends who have worked on big name things, tons of friends who worked on The Revenant, who worked on Intergalactic. Someone's got to go door to door with checks being like, hey, business, we're going to be shooting here. Here's your money for the day in case your business ends up in the background of our movie.
Whenever you have your eye to a top film school, it's basically just a huge leg up. It's not a guarantee for anything. And there are people that didn't go to film school that are also, like, huge stars. Oh, like Tarantino didn't, right?
Yeah. No.
But then it's just like, then there are all the other ones, like Bryan Singer went to USC, Robert Zemeckis, George Lucas, Steven Spielberg didn't, but he's got an office there. I think the other thing is, like, at least in my experience, and I know this feels like it's like an apologia for horrible student debt, and let's all go to the University of Spoiled Children. I honestly do feel like, for, like, the level of just immersion I got in the amount of time that I did, I feel like their approach where you're not allowed to take a specialized anything until you do a year where you specialize in everything. Their rationale being, you can't be a good editor unless you know what it is to be a director or a cinematographer, so you have to, even if you don't like it, you have to do it. However, I feel like my experience is limited to the grad program, and all the successful people came out of the grad program. I don't know how I feel about undergrad liberal arts film production programs.
Film production program.
Yeah.
Yeah. Film studies. I'm a huge fan. I believe in media literacy.
Yeah.
Quite strongly. So I think any kind of literary course, whether it's film studies or literature classics, whatnot, like, I think those are very flexible in teaching you kind of how to navigate information.
Yeah, and I feel like people who call shit like that useless degrees don't know how degrees work.
Yeah.
Or what degrees do. So, I mean, I can point to myself as someone who does directly use their degree in their chosen field of study, but I don't think that necessarily has anything to do with anything. That also said, it's like I said, everyone in my master's program came out of some form of liberal art, or maybe they were in their 30s and they'd worked for a while, or they came out of journalism. They came out of, like, all walks of life, and that was sort of the intent. And no one had gone for undergrad, and like I was a TA for the undergrads for a couple semesters, and like the disparity in quality that came out of the grad program and the undergrad program was just so vast.
Yeah.
And the grads weren't that much older than the undergrads.
I think, just from what I've seen around, I think undergrad film production programs are, I don't want to say they're the worst value, because the worst value would be the like for-profit,
Yes.
like mills.
Yes, the like Full Sails in the University of Phoenix. And
Yeah. You know, you do have a lot of, you do need some discretion. There are a lot of just kind of mills out there that won't actually improve your ability to get in. You do need to look at the school's reputation. So university film production is probably the second worst deal. If you're looking at grad level, you're probably better off doing another undergrad in another topic and then taking that into grad level production. Or if you don't want to go on to grad level, look at a vocational school.
Yeah.
Because it'll cost you a fraction and you'll be done in half the time.
I think whenever people ask, should I go to film school, if they wanted to go to a vocational school, they would. I think there is that sort of prestige that's attached to it.
Yeah.
That said, even schools like NYU and USC, again, even for undergrad, the top ones, you're not even allowed to touch a camera until you're a junior.
Yeah, and that's
And people get so pissy about, like, you have to go, read Dostoevsky, and, you have to take your math class and your physics requirement, and it's like, but that's a liberal arts degree, that's part of it, and the problem with film production is it doesn't really mesh with that in a way that, say, like, in English or any kind of writing, creative writing, film studies would, and I think the undergrads do kind of get the short end of the stick in terms of actual experience. I think that is the important question. Like, would you say that you're able to make a living purely off of what you went to school for?
With the skills I went to school for, yes. There's some caveats in that would come down to, like, the nitty-gritty of the coursework. Of, like, I don't think they did quite enough to cover things like the reality of corporate video or freelancing, like,
God, no.
hey guys, if you're watching this, just a reminder, you need to put in how to charge people as a freelancer into that course material. It's a bit of feedback that I know they get every single year.
When you go into any film school, it could be like, the one you went to, or SVA, or USC, NYU, there is a certain level of expectation that people have. Not all of it is realistic. And I think that is also the difference between, like, going into film production when you're older, have a little more life experience, because in my grad school experience, the younger ones tended to be a little more big-headed and unrealistic. Yeah, they learned their lesson.
A little more pie in the sky.
Yeah, they learned their lesson eventually. There was definitely, like, I think you would see this more at a school like USC, where everyone expects to end up like George Lucas and have, like, this huge name.
So if you're going to school in Calgary, if you're going to film school in Calgary, and you're not looking to move immediately afterwards, then you're probably going to have a little bit more grounded expectation that it's like, hey, if I'm going into production, I'm probably going to start off as a grip or a lamp op. If I'm coming out of the editing stream, it's like, I'm going to be an assistant editor or a compiler or something like that. I'm going to be a DIT. I'm not going to be, I'm not going to be a DP on a feature.
Because that's another thing, is, like, people getting big-headed at the top schools. It's like, again, people be like, well, I'm going to be a director the second I graduate. Ryan Coogler did. He directed Fruitvale Station. I think he hadn't even graduated yet. And then he directed Creed 2 years later. So, yeah, it does happen.
So I think tempering kind of that expectation, both in terms of, like, what are you going to get out of it? Like, are you aiming to be technical? Do you just want to work in movies, or
do you want to be a YouTuber?
And so if you've got, both good aspirational and realistic expectations that vary wildly depending on, like, where you are and where you're willing to physically move. And that's a huge thing, because, like, Ryan Coogler's example couldn't have happened outside of California.
No.
So...
No. And also, like, with the right connections, which I believe in his case was Forrest Whitaker.
Yeah.
He crossed paths with Forrest Whitaker at the right time, which he would not have done if he had not gone to the school he went to when he did.
Like, I mean, there's a lot you can do to stack the odds, but there's also still kind of a lot of luck that comes into it.
Yeah.
And, right place, right time. And if you're if you can't be in that right place, like if you do want to stay in a 5th tier like place, like if you want to stay in Georgia, if you want to stay in Kansas, if you want to stay in Montana or Utah or
I don't know
Alberta.
if I'd call Georgia 5th tier though. I think Georgia.
No, they're probably
Georgia's
second.
up to I think Georgia's solidly 2.
Georgia's solidly at 2
They've got
at this
CNN.
point.
They've got all the Marvel movies. Yeah, Georgia's doing aight.
Georgia's doing good. If you're in kind of one of the smaller markets, you know, and depending on kind of how small that market is, like, you know, temper your expectations to it. Do you want to work your way up to bigger and bigger markets? Like, you know, if you're in Canada, it's like if you're in Calgary, are you willing to stick it out long term and keep working on the government grants, keep working on the stuff until you can get, you know, basically break into that small circle of Canadian filmmakers who get money? Or are you going to sort of work your way like, all right, I'm in Calgary, I'm going to move on over to Vancouver, and then I'm going to move to Toronto, and then I'm going to move to New York, and then I'm going to move to California.
Yeah. Expecting to know what you want right out of the gate before you make that kind of decision, it's not going to happen. I
think some people do, but probably because they've already got a taste of it. Like they got a taste of it in high school.
Yeah, not the people who are thinking, should I go to film school?
Yeah.
So that is another thing to talk about. Like whenever you want to talk about like what's the big 5, it's USC, NYU, AFI, the one that doesn't matter, and I think Florida State. Is that right?
That's the 3, like, who cares?
It's true. So here's the thing, like...
Well, past the 4, I guess, because
Yeah.
you're going to want to include UC.
No, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, but,
No,
I mean...
No, we don't say the name of our arch enemy.
Yeah. They're not my arch enemy.
Okay, so, like, AFI recently took the crown from USC as the top film school. And the reason I didn't even bother applying to AFI is AFI does assume some actually not insubstantial amount of experience in your field of choice. You have to apply to a track, so like directing, cinematography, editing, writing, and you cannot stray out of that track. AFI's program is a lot shorter for that reason. I think it's only a year and a half. It doesn't really offer you much outside of whatever your specialized vocation is. A lot of the more artistic sorts come from AFI. Your David Lynch, your Darren Aronofsky, and they want to cultivate your auteurness.
Yeah, AFI's kind of a up your game sort of destination.
Yeah, so. And that obviously only applies to grad. Columbia's grad program, also, Columbia doesn't bother having an undergrad program, but their grad program's definitely on the ups and has some, you know, big name alumni like Catherine Bigelow. For that reason, I assume they are more commercial. I don't know, I didn't go there. NYU is a lot more indie and artistic. You have from their alumni like Martin Scorsese, Woody Allen, Spike Lee, Brett Ratner. Wesleyan. Michael Bay, Joss Whedon, and one of my NYU professors actually all went to Wesleyan at the same time. For undergrad, no less. See, undergrad can do you good.
Canada would be University of Toronto, McGill, and SAIT. There's a lot of other like decent programs and more specialized programs scattered around the post-production industries, but those would be the 3 big that are either producing working directors, which would be McGill and U of T, or technicians, which would be SAIT and U of T. Strangely, most of the people in Vancouver just sort of learn on the job.
I think that's what most people do. Because whenever people tell you that you don't need a degree or you don't need to go to school in order to go to work in film, they're right.
Yeah.
They're absolutely right. But here's the thing, like, it's so much harder.
Yeah.
It's like just, I mean, I guess the same could apply for, like, engineering or any other thing that, like, requires actual skills and knowledge. Like, it is really difficult to just dive into something and just work your way up from, like, a PA.
It's really easy to flame out.
Yes.
So one of the great things that film school gives you, like even if you go to a vocational school or a technical college for it, is that it gives you a better sense of the whole. So that rather than like, hey, I want to work in movies, and it's like, okay, so you took your set etiquette and protocol course, and now you're a PA locking off roads, and you're going to be doing that for the next 2-3 years. Because you don't have a better sense of the whole, you're not going to be able to think strategically about your job, which is that like, okay, I'm a PA, I'm doing roads, I want to get to know the people over in locations. I want to get the people know the people over in set, and I either want to become a specialized PA or I want to get into the office. Because even though an office PA is still just a PA, they're working with the director, they're working with the first AD, they're working with the production coordinator, they're working with the production manager, they're seeing the producer, they're getting to know names and faces. If you can't think strategically about it, then you're going to be a locations PA forever, and you're just going to be locking off roads for 3 years until you're like, screw this, I'm going to go get a normal job that pays the same and doesn't require me to work 16-hour days for 3 weeks in a row.
The way you think film sets work, if you've never worked on one or never been taught how they work, you're wrong.
Yeah.
Holy God, are you wrong? Like, I'm not going to name any names here, but I've been on some sets by people who have never been on a real set that are just a total shit show. And, you know, you need to know basic things like...
How were craft services on those sets?
Yeah. I think it's also really dangerous for like the entry-level person to just fall in with a bunch of asshats that are going to exploit you and teach you nothing.
Oh, there's another dimension to it, is that there are a ton, even still to this day, a metric ton of exploitative assholes out there who are looking for people who want to be in movies, and they will overwork them, underpay them,
or not pay them
and
at
put
all.
them at risk.
If you're looking to work on a film set, do not work for free.
Yeah.
Don't do it. Even if they're your friends. I mean, if they're like your best friend, then maybe, but don't work for free. You don't have to work for free. You should be making at least $100 a day as an entry-level person, probably more.
Here's one of the biggest things that you're going to get from film school that you're not necessarily you're not going to have enough of, because you can never have enough of, but that you're really not going to have enough of if you just dive right into it, and that's safety training. Because film sets are freaking dangerous. You have a lot of people moving around, you have a lot of heavy equipment, you have a lot of specialized equipment. If it's anything approaching a big set, then you're talking about really, really high voltages. Like, there are a ton of safety concerns, and when you run into these, like, particular like non-union shoots where it's just some fly-by-night company,
Someone that girl in Georgia,
which is exactly where it's going. Like, this, like, hey, let's just this fly-by-night production company's like, hey, we're gonna make this movie, and so they got a whole bunch of teenagers and 20-somethings who wanted to be in movies, and they had a couple trained people, and Sarah was one of them, and she was first camera assistant. And they had this setup where they were doing this dream sequence out on the train tracks, and the production coordinator had called the rail office to try and book the track, and they had been rejected because there was a train going through, there was a shipment going through at that time, and the producer, who is also the director, is like, well, screw it, we're gonna be maverick filmmakers. We're just gonna go rogue and do it anyway. And a woman lost her life.
There are other issues to consider, like race and gender issues and discriminations, which we're not gonna get into now. That's I think maybe a topic for another day.
Yeah.
That's a biggie. But it's difficult to say, is it worth it? Because it depends on what you want, and it's like such a wide spectrum of questions to ask, whether you want to get into a vocational school so you can learn a trade and then just make a living, or if you want to be like a big name film person and go to all the fun film festivals every year, and or be a professor or something. I think a lot of it really does come down to cost, because I whenever I get asked the question, is it worth it? in my case, I kind of go back and forth because it all comes down to that debt. Because I'm like, if I didn't go into debt, or if I'd even gone into less debt, like even half the debt I'm in now, I would say, yeah, it was totally worth it. But to be 10 grand more in debt now, despite having paid in 20, that's insane. And I know that doesn't really have anything to do with the school, except for the fact that the school doesn't really offer aid to grad students because it's the top film school, and if you don't want to pay it, there's 200 people in line behind you that will kill to be in your place.
And that's part of the real challenge with the big ones is it's almost like gambling. Mm-hmm. Like, yeah, you could be like you are kind of getting potential access to the shortcuts to make a spotlight career really quickly, but if you're not the lucky one,
I mean, even if you are the lucky one, is the thing. Like,
I think presumes
the only exception I know is Ryan Coogler. Even the other people I know that are like super doing really well, still in a lot of debt. You know, it's like
So it's like unless you are the one lucky one, you're probably then it's still gonna take a while to like pay that down.
I mean, like it's just true of all grad schools. It's like if you're like $60,000, $100,000, $200,000 in debt, you know, it's like that will just follow you around and it will affect your life decisions. Although one important thing, if you pay your minimum payments every year for 25 years, if you have federal loans, they will get forgiven at the end of that period. People don't know this.
That
is true.
On the flip side, I can think of very, very few downsides to taking the vocational route. You know, yes, it's not going to, like, you have a much lower chance of being a star, but you can, you know, you can make a living working in movies or working in related fields. And it's not the easiest life. It's not the easiest living. There is a lot of uncertainty. But at the same time, it's doable. It is doable.
Well, it's totally doable.
And the pay in, like particularly for a vocational school, like if it's a state school or a like federally funded school,
or even if you get financial aid,
which
I hear happens at the school that shall not be named.
Yeah, like so if you're going through your entire, like if it's 2 years and it's only going to cost you like $10,000 in tuition, then
totally worth it. Because I know it's like if you're young and you don't have any debt, like 10 grand might seem like a lot. It's
not that much.
It's like amazing the difference between 10 and 60.
Yeah, like I mean I had paid for most of it, and I was only like, so by the time I was done, I was only about $3,000 in debt, and I got a film-related job right out of school, and I was debt-free by Christmas.
I feel like I could be debt-free based on like, just solely based on like my freelance income, YouTube income, and Patreon income. I could be debt-free 2030.
2030?
Yeah.
14 years?
Another horrible thing. There's a ceiling on the amount of student debt interest you can write off every year. It is $2,500. I accrue about $4,000. America!
I think that's a good place to end, and then I'm going to jump on a plane and go back to the land of socialized medicine and mitigated student debt.
I'm gonna marry wealthy.